The origin of the Devonshire Regiment can be traced back more than 340 years to one of the most unstable periods of English history. In 1685, King James II faced a major uprising known as the Monmouth Rebellion, led by the Duke of Monmouth, the illegitimate son of King Charles II, who attempted to seize the throne. To crush the rebellion and strengthen royal authority, new regiments were rapidly raised across the country. One of these was the Duke of Beaufort's Musketeers, formed under Henry Somerset, the Duke of Beaufort. Like many early British Army units, it would change names repeatedly over the centuries depending on its colonel, eventually becoming the 11th Regiment of Foot in 1751 before finally earning the title the Devonshire Regiment in 1881. What began as an emergency military unit raised for a domestic crisis would go on to fight across Europe, India, Africa, and nearly every major British conflict for over 250 years. One of the most remarkable moments in the regiment's early history came only 3 years after its creation. Although originally raised to defend King James II, the regiment ultimately abandoned him during the Glorious Revolution of 1688. At the time, England was deeply divided over religion, and fears that James II, a Catholic monarch, was trying to restore Catholic dominance in a largely Protestant nation. When William of Orange landed in England with an invasion force, many officers, nobles, and even entire military units began switching allegiance. The future Devonshire Regiment was among them. Rather than fighting for the king they had originally been formed to protect, the regiment declared support for William and Mary. This defection was indicative of the wider collapse of James II's authority, as support for him evaporated across the army. James eventually fled the country, and William took the throne without a large-scale civil war. Though the fact the regiment changed sides during one of the most important constitutional crises in British history does give it a uniquely dramatic origin story. One of the regiment's most famous and romanticised stories comes from the Napoleonic Wars during the Peninsular Campaign in Spain and Portugal in the early 1800s. According to regimental tradition, the Devons once encountered a French regiment marching nearby. Rather than immediately opening fire, both units supposedly paused, saluted one another respectfully, and continued marching side by side for a short distance. The story claims that the Devonshire soldiers then began playing the tune, "We've lived and loved together." The incident became legendary within the regiment, and was often used to symbolise the idea of mutual respect between professional soldiers, even when they were enemies on the battlefield. Historians debate how accurate the story truly is. Like many military legends passed down through generations, it may have been embellished over time or partially fictionalised. However, whether completely true or not, the tale became an important part of the Devonshire Regiment's identity and reflected the romantic image many later generations had of Napoleonic warfare. One of the darkest and most heroic chapters in the regiment's history came during the First World War. By May 1918, Germany had launched a series of huge offensives on the Western Front, in a desperate attempt to win before large numbers of American troops arrived in Europe. One of these attacks, the Third Battle of the Aisne, struck Allied positions in France with overwhelming speed and force. The 2nd Battalion of the Devonshire Regiment was ordered to defend a woodland position known as Bois des Buttes near the River Aisne. Despite being heavily outnumbered and subjected to intense artillery bombardment, the battalion held its ground against repeated German assaults, fighting to death rather than giving up their position. The casualties were catastrophic. By the end of the battle, the battalion had lost 23 officers, and 528 men were killed, wounded, missing, or captured. Truly devastating losses for a single infantry battalion. Entire companies were effectively destroyed in the fighting. Yet their resistance delayed the German advance at a critical moment and earned widespread admiration from Allied commanders. In recognition of their extraordinary bravery, the French government awarded the battalion the Croix de Guerre, one of France's highest military decorations for gallantry. The action at Bois des Buttes became one of the defining moments in Devonshire Regiment history, and even today the legacy of that honour survives within the Rifles, proudly worn in their uniform as one of their regiment's 4 golden threads. During the Napoleonic Wars, the 11th Regiment of Foot gained a reputation for stubborn bravery and some of the hardest fighting of the Peninsular War. Their most famous ordeal came at the Battle of Salamanca in 1812, one of the Duke of Wellington's greatest victories against the French. The battle was a turning point in the war in Spain, Wellington's army launched a sudden and devastating attack against French forces, helping to drive Napoleon's troops out of central Spain. But victory came at a terrible cost for many British regiments, including the 11th Regiment of Foot. The regiment suffered horrific casualties during the fighting, a devastating 340 out of 516 men. Their losses were so severe that soldiers from other units reportedly began referring to them as the Bloody 11th. At the time, British infantry regiments often built their reputations through battlefield endurance, discipline, and courage under fire, and Salamanca cemented the 11th Foot's reputation as a hardened fighting regiment. The battle itself became legendary in British military history, and for the Devons, it marked the moment they earned one of the most memorable nicknames in the British Army. Thank you to the National Lottery Heritage Fund and to National Lottery players who have made this video and videos like this possible.